Welcome to The Swing of Things with Amanda Kraus, a brand new podcast hosted by me, Amanda Kraus, and produced with Row 360. We're going to talk a little bit about rowing and a lot about other things. In this episode, I'm joined by Leung and Kate Johnson to discuss mental health within elite sport. Leung is the chief executive of USA Gymnastics. She's a former competitive gymnast turned successful businesswoman. Leung returned to her sport after a successful stint as the vice president for global partnerships at the NBA. Kate Johnson is the integrated marketing director of sports, media, and entertainment at Google, and is a former USRowing world champion and Athens 2004 Olympic silver medalist. First up is Leung. Hi, Lily. Thanks for joining us on The Swing of Things.
Hi, Amanda. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
And you're in Indianapolis, is that right?
I am. Yep, that's correct.
We're in the same time zone, which is nice.
It is nice. I know I've been overseas for a little bit, so it's good to be back home.
Yeah. Where did you just get back from?
I just got back from Turkey at our International Federation Congress. And then before that, so I had been gone for 3 weeks. And before that, I was in Japan for our World Championships, both artistic and rhythmic World Championships.
Wow. So have you been to Tokyo twice this year, in this calendar year?
Well, those World Championships were held in Kitakyushu, so south of Tokyo and Fukuoka. Okay. And then before that, I was in Tokyo for the games. And before that, I was in Tokyo for, it was essentially kind of a test event for the games, a few months before the games. So yeah.
So you've been to Japan 3 times this year?
In a full 12-month period, yes, I have.
Wow. You must be good at international flights at this point.
Getting used to it. It's still exhausting, but yeah, getting used to it.
Well, thanks for joining. I've been really eager, selfishly, to speak with you as one of the few other female CEOs of national governing bodies of sport in the United States. And, you know, I think you're an easy person to look up to, having taken the helm at USA Gymnastics almost 3 years ago. Is that right?
Yeah, I am. March of next year will be 3 years.
All right. So certainly not an easy role for anybody. And I don't know that leading any of these sports is an easy role. But selfishly, I wanted to ask you a little bit about just sort of broadly about the role and, you know, as you came in, what were the biggest challenges? And then what do you enjoy the most in the role?
So obviously I did come into a challenging situation, which I knew. I mean, I entered into it eyes wide open. And for me, well, one, I just personally, I have a hard time shying away from challenges. I enjoy challenges.
Yeah, me too.
And it's also, I mean, I was a gymnast, trained in the sport from the age of 7 to about 22 years old. So 15 years of my life during the formative years was involved in the sport. And when this position became available, it was one that I really couldn't say no to, because in a way it was coming back full circle for me, having started in the sport many years ago. So it's a passion project for me. There's no question about that. I love the sport. I think the sport provides so much opportunity for athletes and young kids, and that's why I wanted to be a part of it, in terms of be a part of rebuilding the sport and really bring it back to what I thought it should be. In terms of the challenges coming on board, some of the things I had spent my time on early on was one, really looking at the risks and mitigating them from an organizational standpoint, whether it's processes, policies, procedures, things like that. And the other big challenge was recruiting talent. I have always said from day one that this was not a challenge that could be taken on by one person, that it will take a village to make the changes that we need to make. And so the important thing really early on for me was to recruit a leadership team that was one, buying into the mission of what we wanted to achieve at USA Gymnastics, but two, having the capability to be able to execute on that. And I've been 2.5 years on. I've been really, really lucky to have an amazing leadership team, as well as just an incredible team in general at USA Gymnastics to do the things that we've been able to do.
Yeah, yeah. How many full-time staff do you
We're
have
over
there?
50.
Okay, all right. And what do you enjoy the most in your day-to-day or week to week?
I would say it's the people. It really is the people in terms of one, getting to know and meeting a lot of people. I think that fuels me. But also knowing that we're doing the right things with the right intentions. That's really, really important, is that ultimately we want to grow the sport in a really safe manner. We want to do it because we think it's the right thing to do in terms of really being able to give opportunities for kids to experience the sport in a positive way. And that's why we come to work on a day-to-day basis, is to do those things.
Yeah, that sounds familiar. Yes. Yeah, yeah. And so, we're here today to talk about athlete mental health. And you and I, before we came on air here, both sort of joked about that's not either of our backgrounds. But, as CEOs, I think that's part of the job, right? Is taking on all of the pieces, whether that's, the areas that we have the expertise in or not, and finding good partners to get us up to speed on all sorts of fronts. But you were a collegiate athlete, a gymnast, at Michigan, right? And so I think we have that in common. I was not a gymnast. I'm 6'1", so yeah, that's can't even do a cartwheel. But I was a collegiate rower. You were a collegiate gymnast, and I was thinking about this conversation this morning, and I was thinking about how and I think we're the exact same age, actually. And I was thinking about how when we were in college, at least for me, and I'm curious about you, mental health was just not a topic as an athlete. You would go to the trainer for strains or injuries or all sorts of things. And that was very much par for the course. But I don't believe mental health, I don't think those words ever even came out of my mouth or any coaches or trainers' mouths around me. And I wonder if that was the same for you as a gymnast.
Say I had a similar experience as well. Sports psychology was a topic. And so even before I went to college, my coaches would invite sports psychologists in to work with us to enhance performance in competition. But it was not about mental health per se. It was about how to use psychology to perform better in competition and to reach that next level from a performance standpoint, but not necessarily from a kind of true mental health standpoint. In terms of how do you take care of yourself better, things like that. But so I would say, you're exactly right. Mental health was not a term that I had utilized or been exposed to when I was an athlete.
Yeah, yeah, it's a very different time now, and thank goodness, right? I think we all could have been in better places and had teammates who could have been in much better, healthier places if it had been a topic and a resource. But here we are now, and one of the questions I have for you is around the research behind mental health. Say that they're pressure points for professional athletes. And they are really around the exit from professional sports. So we'll talk about that a little bit, which is the retirement. And then the stigma attached to mental illness, people really ending up struggling in silence. And I just wonder if either of these two, which they're related, but very, very different, do either of those resonate with you? Not personally. I mean, in the context of your role as running the sport of gymnastics.
There's no question. I mean, obviously, mental health has become a hot topic over the recent years, and first and foremost, as a leader of a sports organization, we believe that in order for athletes to be, our mission is for holistic development of our athletes. And how do we utilize the sport of gymnastics to best set up our athletes for success in life, not just in the sport? And we also believe that to have total health, that means both physical and mental health, that you have to have mental health in order to be holistically healthy. And it's really important for us to make sure that we are trying to provide the resources that are important to our athletes so that they can thrive in life, even beyond the sport itself. And so, we don't want athletes to be suffering and not to feel that they can't come forward to talk about some of the issues that they're facing, and those being mental health issues as well. That's really important to have that dialogue.
Yeah, and how does that manifest at USA Gymnastics? I mean, in the day-to-day, how do you bring that into the fold of care for athletes?
Well, I think it's really important to start off with, as I mentioned before, that we are really about holistically developing our athletes, and it is making sure that they are learning the sport to, again, best set themselves up for success in life beyond the sport. And so when I came on board, I actually created a position, a chief of athlete wellness position. And part of the remit of this position is to look at holistically developing the athlete, how best to do that, and what are the mental health resources that really are necessary in order to do that as well. And so this chief of athlete wellness, we have developed an athlete health and wellness council, which is made up of athlete representatives. It's made up of coaches and people who come from the sport, as well as medical experts. It's really, really important that medical experts, including mental health professional experts, are a part of this council. And they are the ones who are developing resources, be it educational resources or webinars or other resources that we can push out to our community to make sure that mental health is at the forefront.
That's great. And does that trickle down to, for USA Gymnastics, really helping, I don't know if you call them clubs, programs, youth programs around the country, really start to think that way? Does USA Gymnastics play a role in that, in sort of sharing that information, letting it trickle down and around? And so, how do we think about this way before someone becomes an elite gymnast? How do we sort of get this into the fabric of our sport?
Yeah, no, it's important that people are starting to think about this early on as well, because we also know that there are mental health issues not only at the elite level, but it happens at all different levels, and it's
Yes.
part of society as well.
Yeah.
So to think that it doesn't happen in our sports, even at the lower levels, I think is the wrong way to think about it. But it is. There's no question that we need to be role models in this, in terms of really being at the forefront, saying that mental health is important, and it's an important part of the overall development of our athletes, regardless of the level. And so the resources that are put together by this Athlete Health and Wellness Council, we push out to the entire community. It's not just available for national team members. Right. This is available for our entire community from the grassroots level on up.
Oh, that's fantastic. We're gonna have to talk offline about this more. So moving on, in doing some research, the data show that 35% of elite athletes suffer from some sort of mental health crisis, which it could manifest as stress, eating disorder, burnout, depression, anxiety. What sort of unique pressures do you think, psychologically speaking, do gymnasts face?
Well, I think with the sport of gymnastics, it's a very, very challenging sport, in the sense that gymnasts put themselves in positions, in terms of in doing skills that are extremely physically dangerous.
Yeah. I find it hard to watch them. I mean, I'm one of those people who just sits there in awe of what you all could. I mean, complete awe and almost disbelief.
Gymnasts appear superhuman, and if a gymnast has a bad day, it doesn't mean running a little bit slower or swimming a little bit slower. It actually means that they could land on their heads. They could suffer a life-threatening injury, and I think that is added pressure on our athletes that, frankly, most other athletes don't face, because they're not putting themselves in life-threatening situations when they perform their skills. So I believe that there is that added stress and added pressure with gymnasts in terms of the fact that they are doing skills that are dangerous, physically dangerous to their bodies.
Right. Yeah, that's that is unique for sure. I'm trying to think of other sports that actually have that element. Skiing, maybe?
Yeah, skiing can be very dangerous at times, but there aren't that many. There aren't that many sports that have that level of danger that gymnastics does have.
Right. It might feel dangerous in your own mind. Like if I pull any harder, I am in mortal danger. But you will not, that's not going to cause death, or some sort of catastrophic injury. So, tied to that, I wonder, looking at recent events and not just in gymnastics, but in other sports, and thinking about Tokyo 2020, are there any learnings that have come out of athletes really coming forward, elite athletes, again, not just within gymnastics, but coming forward and saying, I'm just not in the right headspace to perform? And, are we thinking about things differently as a result of these very high profile athletes coming forward and saying, listen, I can't do this. And I'm not injured, but I'm not in the right space to do whatever the sport might be.
Yeah, I think as more and more athletes come forward and say that, I think it becomes even more of a larger topic of conversation amongst the athlete community. And I think it's important for athletes to feel that they have the freedom and they have the right and they have the voice to be able to come forward and say those things. I'm not in the right frame of mind right now. I don't have the ability to perform at my best because of the issues that I'm facing mentally right now. That's not a bad thing for athletes to be able to come forward and feel comfortable saying that. And I hope that more and more athletes feel comfortable to be able to come forward and engage in that dialogue. And on the flip side, when athletes do come forward and say that, then we need to listen. We need to listen, and we need to make sure that their mental health is being looked after.
I think you do know a lot about this topic.
I think I can say this, that it's an important topic for us because, as I mentioned before, we believe that you have to have mental health to be holistically healthy. It's not, we're no longer just about the physical side of things, that you have to have the other side of it, which is the mental health side of it. And we believe that if our athletes are both physically and mentally healthy, ultimately they will perform better. They will be healthier people. They will be better set up for life going forward. All of those, that's hand in hand.
Yeah. I find that there's and also depending on sort of different cultures we're working with and backgrounds, there's different levels of, from all the way from embracing mental health care and wellness to a stigma associated with it. There's no stigma associated with a broken leg, right? Or a back injury. But when it's something that people can't see, which is still very, very real, there's so many people who will still be dismissive of a mental health issue or challenge. And I wonder, and I think that's why it's so beneficial to get out there and have high profile people and athletes talking about this. This is just as real as a broken leg or an injured back.
It is. It absolutely is. And I can understand why some people don't feel that way because it's just not as tangible. And someone I was speaking with who was going through some mental health issues was saying, when I broke a leg or when I broke a bone, there was a roadmap to get from point A of that injury happening to being back out on the floor and competing. So the doctor had given them a roadmap. This is going to take this much amount of time. You need to do this and things like that. But when it comes to a mental health issue, there is no roadmap for it yet. Hopefully one day that there will be. But there's no specific roadmap as to how to go from, okay, I am not feeling sound mentally, to how do I get to the point of feeling sound? And perhaps maybe one day when that roadmap is in place, that people will feel that it's more tangible. but you're right. It's not quite there at the level of what a physical injury looks like versus
Yes.
a mental quote unquote injury.
Yeah, I like the way you're describing that, Lily, is, can we get to a place where there are roadmaps, multiple roadmaps that we can use to advise for a path forward. And I think that will be a really positive step. Because it is unfortunate when people feel like, wow, I really can't talk about this or treat it or share it. And I think, athletes, it's a blessing and a curse, right? Because we're sort of raised to push through, right? Just get it together and do the thing, which is really valuable, right? But you can start to get negative returns on that physically and mentally. So yeah, we see that a lot.
There's no question. And one of the so we ask we do surveys with our athletes quite a bit because we want to make sure that they're providing us feedback and that we give them a feedback loop. And so we put out a survey a little while ago, basically asking them about what resources they want to see us provide. And the number one request was mental health and sports psychology support. That was the number one request that came back from the athletes. And so that's one reason why it is such a big focus of ours, is because our athletes are very tangibly saying, we want this help and we want this resource. And so we have started to provide on-site at our competitions, at least at national championships and Olympic trials, that we have a mental health provider on site at those competitions. And we are going to look to do that even more going forward. And there's a few things that we have in the pipeline as well from a mental health standpoint, in terms of like mental health first aid training for our staff and national team members. That is going to be a requirement going forward for certain members of our team who work with the athletes, who work with our disciplines, and for our medical providers, that they will absolutely have to go through this mental health first aid training. And I believe we're the first NGB to make that a requirement.
That's fantastic.
Of our providers and of our staff.
Can you share that with all of us?
Well, the first training is happening this weekend, so we're literally just rolling it out as we talk about it. But as we go into it more, I'm happy to share more of it with you. But we believe that the mental health first aid is really important because it's about identifying, how to recognize, how to understand, and how to support mental health crises. And that can be depression, it can be anxiety, it can be substance abuse, it can be so many different things. But we really think it's important that our staff who work with athletes have that capability and understanding to be able to identify a mental health issue and then how to support it.
Yeah, that's critical. We did that actually. I was at Row New York before USRowing, and all of our staff went through mental health first aid, and it was incredibly helpful. One thing, I've only been here a year, but one thing, and again, not a mental health professional, but something that I've noticed, and I wonder if you've seen the same thing, is when athletes have retired from rowing and are making that transition out of rowing, and I think we have a longer tenure, I imagine. For some athletes, they're finishing up at 35, 37 years old and looking around and, thinking about their careers and what do they need to do? What opportunities do they have? But also in terms of mental health, it's a really difficult transition going from your whole identity being wrapped up in being an elite athlete. That is your entire identity, or 95% of it. And then one day that is over. And who are you? And what is your value and what is your identity? And I wonder if you see that in gymnastics as well. And what do you do to address that?
No, absolutely. We see that. And when rowers retire at 35, 37, that's quite a bit older than most of our athletes when they retire. I mean, some of our athletes retire in their teens. So wow. It is, that is one area that I have kind of tasked our chief athlete wellness with, is how do we help with that transition from elite sports to, and for us, it's also the transition to collegiate sports after competing at the elite level with clubs. So, for example, I will use my experience as an example, which so I competed at the elite level. My family picked up and moved, so I have a twin sister who was in the sport as well. So my sister and I could train twice a day in the gym, and we were training 35 hours a week. And it was a full-time job, essentially, for us. And we would go to school late and get out early, and graduated with the minimum amount of credits that the state of New Jersey would allow for someone to graduate from high school.
Wow.
So I did not have the normal childhood or the normal high school life because of gymnastics. And I went to college with the maturity level of probably about a 13-year-old.
Wow.
I didn't go to homecoming. Didn't do senior prom, none of that stuff, because it conflicted with practice and competitions.
And then you went away to college.
And then I went away to college, and so it was a big shock to my system. So that is one transition area that we are looking at, because one, myself having gone through that experience, but also I've spoken with a lot of other athletes who have gone through similar experiences. And so they weren't ready to transition from high school to college. That was a big shock for me, and I understand that's happening with other gymnasts. And then also to go from college to be retiring from the sport. So we're looking at resources as to how we can help with that as well, whether it's through mentorship, whether it's through providing a soft landing of sorts, like how do we then create a pipeline for athletes coming out of the sport into other areas that they can go into and still stay involved to some extent. We want to try and provide that soft landing into life after the sport, and it's not easy. It's not easy for a lot of gymnasts right now.
I'm sure, and I have to say, I wasn't even thinking about how young your athletes are. I mean, being a teenager just alone is a roller coaster, right, of emotions and growth and brain development. But much less being an elite athlete on top of that. You have you have some extra challenges and probably extra fun too. I mean, I adore teenagers, but that definitely adds another layer.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a layer of complexity, and that's probably one other thing I should have mentioned with the sport of gymnastics when you had asked me about the differences under the pressure of the sport of gymnastics compared to others, and it's the age. It's the age. It is that, relatively speaking, compared to other sports, our athletes are very young. So
young. What's the average age of your national team members?
We're right. Well, I'll tell you what. This past Olympics was our oldest team in a long, long time. So, and that's what we like to see. We want to see the lifespan of our athlete increasing, and it looks like we're starting to get there, which I think is great. It's great to see. We want to try and make sure that our athletes are being taken care of as they're training to be able to sustain their career in the sport as long as possible. Just because it's a short-lived career compared to many other sports.
Oh yeah. So are they usually around 19, 20?
Yeah, I would say probably right around 19, 18 even, because a lot of times when athletes go off to college, that's when they're kind of leaving the elite level. But some are coming back too. That's what we're seeing in terms of one of our Olympic team members in Tokyo, that she had gone to college and came back. So we're starting to see a prolonged career.
Okay.
We love to see athletes coming back. It's unusual. It's very unusual. Imagine. But no, we would love to see athletes who maybe did retire and then want to come back to the sport. And if that happens more often, that's fantastic.
Yeah. Did your twin end up going and competing in college as well?
She went to Michigan as well.
Oh, you went together. Were you roommates?
We were not.
Okay.
We roomed with field hockey players, but we weren't. We did not room together.
Okay. You'd probably spent a lot of time together in your lives.
It was better for us not to.
A little space. Okay. And then does one still do gymnastics like after they retire? Like, is that not so, like, what do you do?
Gymnastics doesn't lend itself to be a bit of a weekend warrior sport.
Right.
You're kind of in it full time or not. Though I do know some folks who might dabble in it a little bit, like go back into the gym to quote unquote play around. It's a dangerous sport. And so you really can only do so much if you're not training. You really have to train to be able to go in and do to maintain the difficulty and the level of tricks and skills that you had before. You really need to train for it.
Yeah, that makes good sense. Unlike rowing, where you could just suffer through, a race once a year. Not well. It wouldn't be pretty, but you're not going to hurt yourself. Well,
you might, but you're not the same way. Not the same way.
Yeah, not catastrophic. So I have two last questions for you. You've been so generous with your time. One is around, we've talked a lot about mental health and issues around being an elite athlete and struggling with mental health. And let's take a moment to talk about, what's good about our sports and mental health and not just on the elite level, but throughout. I mean, what do you see gymnasts at every level? How do you see them benefiting in terms of mental health from the sport?
Well, as I mentioned before, I mean, I think the sport of gymnastics and many other sports as well, it teaches you a lot of skills, life skills that you can apply. And so for me, it taught me discipline. It taught me how to overcome adversity. It taught me, even though gymnastics isn't necessarily a team sport, it did teach me teamwork. And it taught me how to focus, things like that. And so there are so many things that you can learn from the sport that then you apply to your life beyond the sport as well. And I truly believe that the sport made me a more mentally healthy person. And I hear about that from other gymnasts and parents of gymnasts as well, from all different levels, that they really appreciate the opportunities and that the sport has given them, but also the learnings that they themselves have taken or that they see their kids learning as they grow up and develop through the sport.
Yeah, that seems to be a pretty universal benefit to sport. For sure. Okay, my last question, and mostly I have rowers on this podcast, but it's fun having someone who isn't a rower. So the question is usually, at the end of a very hard row and you're getting off the river, what is your go-to favorite meal? So let's turn that over to something that's relevant to you. I've met you in person. You're extremely fit. You must be doing something if not jumping around or doing tricks in the gym. So what do you do? And don't tell me nothing.
So I do try and work out as often as I can. Do I work out as much as I would like to? No.
Right, you're busy.
Daily life gets in the way of that. But if I'm not able to go to the gym, then at a minimum, I at least try and stretch.
Okay, so you've had a really hard stretch. Lily, that doesn't work. Let's pretend you went to the gym.
Let's pretend I went to the gym.
Okay. Yeah, you had a really...
Oh, you want me to tell you about my meal?
Yeah. So I don't feel like you earned a crazy, wonderful meal after your stretching.
No, that's true. But let me tell you this. I am very equal opportunity when it comes to food. I eat pretty much everything. My family brought me up and basically taught me to try everything, be open to all different types of food. I've traveled a lot in my work, and so literally...
You eat anything. You're one of those people. I like that. I want to be one of those people. Okay, so you're done with your workout, but you must have favorites.
I guess it's probably a really nice pizza.
Oh, do you have that in Indiana?
Of course we do.
Sorry. Oh, I was such a New Yorker just now. Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
Indianapolis has much better food than I think people expect it to have.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So a good pizza.
Probably. That's probably in terms of at least like I like I said, I love cheese and I love bread. Those are probably two food items I would never give up.
I love that answer. That's kind of great. I mean, I would have been happy with any answer you gave, but I have to say that that's really kind of great because for those who haven't met you, I mean, you don't look like someone who's sitting around saying like, I just love cheesy bread. So that was refreshing. And I've so appreciated some time with you, and I'm looking forward to more time and working together to help all of our athletes, whether they're on rivers or lakes or in a gym. really keeping top of mind everyone's well-being and health. And clearly that's top of mind for you. And so I really appreciate learning from you and talking with you today.
No, you're so welcome. I really enjoyed it as well, Amanda. And yeah, I can't tell you how important this topic is for us. It's front and center.
Yeah. Well, we'll keep talking about it. And thank you. And enjoy your night. Go eat some cheesy bread.
I definitely will do that.
All right. Thanks, Lily.
Thanks, Amanda.
That was Lily Leung. Next up, I spoke to Kate Johnson. Hi, Kate. Thanks for joining me this afternoon.
Hey, Amanda. It's great to be here and talking to you.
So you're in sunny California, huh?
It is very sunny today, actually. It's like a perfect fall day. Crisp air, perfect skies.
Oh, and it's still light out.
No fires right now, no forest fires.
Good.
So we're happy. And yeah, it's not dark yet. It's going to get dark very soon here, though.
Yeah. Our least favorite time of year here in terms of the early darkness, because then I want dinner at like 4:30. So
exactly. And then to be in bed like an hour later, which doesn't work for other members of my family.
Right. Time to tuck in. Well, thank you for joining me on this podcast, The Swing of Things. And I've been really eager to speak with you. I've known you a little bit and known who you are for many, many years and admired you from a distance, obviously as an Olympian, but also as someone who's been so successful across, your industry and really looked up to and admired by so many athletes. So really appreciate your time tonight.
Well, thank you. It swings both ways. Do you see what I did there?
That was clever. I do. Good. You're good at this.
But it's right back at you, Amanda. I have been an admirer from afar for a long time. So I'm glad to see you at our helm.
Oh, thank you. It has been an adventure already. Year one is down.
Yes, year one done. So that's a big deal. I know that because I started my job not too long ago as well, and I know how big that first year is. It's massive.
Yeah, it's good. It's good to have it behind me. So the topic we want to discuss with you is really something that's been top of mind for me since I started, which is really thinking about that transition, that critical transition that elite athletes go through when they stop rowing, when they retire, and go from being, elite athletes to citizens of the world, without, being in a boat on a daily basis. And frankly, how challenging that can be. So, I had the conversation with Lily Leung. She's the CEO of USA Gymnastics, and she talked about how young her athletes are when they retire. Some of them are only 17. So, it's a really important conversation, and appreciate you being here for it. But a little bit about you first, which is, I know that you're modest, so I will let the world know in case they don't already. You're an Olympic silver medalist, a world champion, a 3-time NCAA All-American rower from Michigan, rowed at Michigan. You've been named all sorts of most powerful women in 40 under 40, which is really neat. I always wanted to get one of those, but it's too late for me now.
Maybe there's a 50 under 50.
Maybe, I have a little time. And so all sorts of success beyond rowing, including a really successful career at IMG and then 6 years, right, at Visa? Was it 7 or 6?
Yep.
6 years at Visa.
Yeah, almost 7. Yeah.
And now director of integrated marketing, at Google is it sports media and entertainment? Am I getting that right?
Yep. Okay. That's right. I'm building a sports and entertainment marketing practice at Google, basically ground up. So dusting off the never used before entrepreneurial skills, which I know you have in spades. So I could take some tips from you.
Holy cow. That sounds like a very big job.
Yeah, it is a big job. It's been an exhausting 2 years, but it's good. It's been a wonderful challenge too.
Incredible. All right. So you're someone who, walked the walk. You went from being an Olympic medalist in Athens and, being very successful there and obviously finding success afterwards. But you talk a bit about sort of that, I don't know whether to call it a post-Olympic slump. We could just call it, depression. We could call it transition. whatever we call it, it's challenging. And I was really drawn to the way you talked about that. And I want to get into what we can do to help athletes avoid it. Research shows it's really inevitable. So there's no sort of, how do we stop it from happening? But what can we do to really help these athletes navigate this transition? So let's talk about you for a little bit. So if you don't mind, tell us what it was like to win a silver medal in Athens, which is incredible, in the women's 8. What was that feeling right afterwards? And then sort of take us through, when you started to feel like, what now? Or I don't want to put words into your mouth.
Yeah.
But
yeah. So I'm so glad we're talking about this subject, because this is like a big passion point of mine, as many of my former teammates know, but also as frankly the sports and entertainment marketing world that I'm now in knows, because it's something that I actually publicly speak about and have been very involved in helping with, in my time at Visa, my time at IMG, and definitely now turning my attention towards it at Google to see what companies can do to help with this, because it's a problem. And, for me, my transition started, and I think this is the case for a lot of athletes. But as we all know, sport is such a mental game, so much of it is mental. And so for me, not knowing, first and foremost, if I was going to retire after the 2004 Olympics, not having that question answered, but like dancing with it a little bit, even before I frankly made it to the Olympics, was something that mentally I found tough, because you don't want to jinx yourself, right? You don't want to put yourself in the boat before you're in the boat. You don't want to be thinking about what comes next before you've even arrived at the thing you've been training for your whole life. And yet we're human. Like the natural nature of, especially being a human that has been programmed to live in 4-year increments your entire life, like with a very specific goal, the fear of not having that goal was already there before I'd even attained it. And I think that's an important comment, because like, if we don't acknowledge that, if like the world around these athletes doesn't acknowledge that that's a weight that they're carrying, even if they don't want to, that they feel guilty about carrying it. But it's a reality, because what athletes do know for sure is that the Olympics are going to come, and then they're going to end. And then just like it starts over again every year, including a world championship year. After the Olympics, it's quite different. Like the review of the tape isn't, am I going to do this for one more year to get to the next world championships or, whatever. It's, do I want to commit to another 4 years, which is a really big ask. And so for me, my transition was, I was worried about that, not knowing what was going to come next. And so, to a negative point where I was actually starting to interview at a time when literally my head should have only been in the boat. Like I should have only been thinking about showing up at practice. And there's actually a dirty secret that I never told Tom Terhar then, which is that I took a train to New York City, interviewed with the New York City 2012 Olympic bid, back when New York was bidding to host the Olympics, because I was so scared about not having something lined up for when it was all over. And I remember taking the train back from New York City to Princeton to get to practice. And I was like running late for practice. I was nervous I was going to be late for practice. And I just had this overwhelming sense of guilt of like, what are you doing, Kate? You should not even be thinking about this right now. You should only be thinking about, making the team. And then of course, like winning your medal at the Olympic Games for Team USA. So I share that just because first acknowledging that athletes are thinking about this is the first step in helping remove that pressure that they're putting on themselves and feeling probably shame around in having those thoughts. So then for me, the Olympics come, we win our silver medal. I had a moment on the podium where I was like pinching myself, trying to wake myself up. But my transition started that afternoon. We'd done the press conference, and then I'd made a date to meet my parents at like 4 p.m. in the afternoon to go over to Team USA House. And I had agreed to meet them on this like street corner in Athens, and they were late. And the fact that they were late actually was the trigger point for me of like all those feelings that were now going to come and probably stay with me for the next, I would say, at least 18 months, which was like, for someone who'd been on a schedule. I mean, you think about the games, it's the only tape we don't even review from a performance perspective, right? Like every performance, we review the tape so that we can get better. You don't even review your Olympic performance. It's like you're done, on to the next. You know, the first beverage you're handed is a beer.
Right.
Because it's time to celebrate. And so all the things that have been set up to make you a successful athlete literally start to deconstruct the minute you cross that finish line.
That afternoon.
You're now it's that quickly. And I would say, it's the same for my teammates. There was the day after the Olympic final, I remember looking for some of my teammates in the village and being like, where are these guys? They were working out in the gym because they didn't know what else to do. There's that I've been so programmed to be on that the ability to be off was such a stark contrast.
Wait, they worked out. I want to make sure I heard that right. And you can see my face.
And I am going to name these ladies.
Listeners.
It was like Leanne Nelson, Megan Dirkmont, Sam McGee. I mean, those ladies were on. I found them in the gym working out, like on Stairmasters, and thinking like, what are you guys doing? And they're kind of like, before we go to all these events, we felt like we had to do this thing because to not work out also felt very strange because you've just been doing this 3 times a day for the however long. So yeah, I'll share with you, our boat got together for our 10-year reunion in 2014, and we had like a sleepover at Leanne's house. And I mean, at some point at 3 a.m, somebody opened up about how low they'd been after the games, and it was that realization for all of us of like, oh wait, that was not unique to you, that was not unique to me, that was 100% something we were all feeling, and none of us knew to reach out to the other person. Or any of our teammates to kind of connect on that. Yeah.
Wow.
Brutal.
Wow. Why do you think that was?
Because I think that athletes we're so driven, we're so focused, and we take so much on ourselves. Like even though we have this enormous army around us that you could not make it to, the top of your game without, at the end of the day, it's still you sitting on the starting line having to deliver a performance. And so that self-accountability, I think, is so strong in athletes that when you slip into a slump, you think it's you and there's something about you that has to get yourself out of it, and that must be unique to you. And I just don't think, because we haven't talked about that transition enough culturally and how hard it is, I think, that self-reliance and self-responsibility to get yourself out of the funk is something that athletes carry the burden of really uniquely. And it's tough. I'm not a depressive person, and I was depressed after the Olympics for sure.
And I can't believe it was that fast too, that afternoon.
Yep.
That, So a piece you wrote that I really, really enjoyed reading, it's called Now What? An Olympic Musing, which you wrote just this August. And I think you were really, truly speaking to our athletes in Tokyo, and, that they had endured COVID and quarantines and lockdowns, plus an extra year of training. And this quote stood out to me. You said, "It is unimaginable to me what these athletes have had to navigate this year. And yet I know that the hardest part is yet to come, and no one is talking about it." And I think that really summed up that, wow, it wasn't even the 5 years. It was no matter what happens in Tokyo, the security and predictability of each day as an elite athlete, like you said, just disappears. And the fact that you had teammates literally seeking out the Stairmasters, right? That afternoon really sort of sums it up. A question for you, Kate, is, I feel like my role at US Rowing, or at least a part of it, is to make sure our national team is well run and that our athletes are supported while they're with us, and as Paralympians and the senior team athletes retire from rowing, what advice do you have? And we'll get to the advice for the athletes later, but what advice do you have for me and for US Rowing? Like, how can we be supportive? What can we be doing? I can imagine part of it is opening up the dialogue, and naming the problem or the challenge. But what steps do you think we can be taking?
It's interesting because I think societally everybody wants to solve for the what's next part of it, but that's actually not the first step. Yes, the job, the CV, dusting off and writing the CV, like that stuff is helpful. I think the USOC and the IOC have tried to do that in partnering with like ADECO and creating, a number of those programs. But actually it's the mental burden, because if the mental health of the athlete isn't in a good place, a lot of that stuff of like getting my CV ready is going to feel inauthentic, or like starting to interview jobs when you mentally don't feel like you're in a great space. is really, it's that much harder to do. Like, you need to be in a really mentally healthy state to take on, you know, the courage to go into a job interview and to know that you might not get it. You know, I mean, that alone on a good day is a big undertaking. So I think the biggest thing I'd love to see US Rowing and the USOC and just our overall leadership do is start with the conversation. Like, bring in mental health experts who are able to prep people for what's going to come next. I mean, I have seared in my brain memories of, you know, Dr. Joe Hannafin talking about the physiological change that you go through and how to make sure that you keep exercising after the Olympics. Like, there is not enough talk about that transition as a physical specimen, but especially as a mental and emotional specimen, right? And we've done so much mental training to perform that the conversation around how to just be, you know, how to embrace a new beginning is like a huge undertaking for these athletes. I mean, I when I talk about this, I put people in the place of trying to understand, listen, you're asking these athletes to go from being literally the very best in the world at what they do to starting over from scratch and figuring it out. And in that transition, there is a mental health piece that must be addressed and must be talked about. And some of that is just like, again, it's the dialogue. It's making it a non-taboo thing to talk about. I learned, you know, at Visa, I built an Olympian Paralympian business development program at Visa from the ground up there that I'm incredibly proud of. It's like, if I did anything at Visa, that is the thing I am most proud of. And in that process of interviewing, so in my time there, I saw, I think, 4 different classes come through of Olympians and Paralympians that we hired into this rotational program. But my favorite part of that was sitting in the interview process. And as an athlete, interviewing them, not about like what they could bring to Visa. That was certainly part of the interview, but hearing about their transition and what they'd gone through. And from luge athletes to, you know, Paralympic track and field stars through to like pretty well-known NBC, you know, selected stars of our team, everybody had a similar talk track about how hard that transition was and a similar talk track about how little their NGB or the USOC had been able to help them or even acknowledged that transition for them. And I think some of that too is there's a closure piece, I think, that's really important in order to help athletes begin. And that's not necessarily forcing athletes to name retirement earlier than they're ready to, but acknowledging like, hey, you know, thank you for your service to America, to US Rowing in competing on Team USA. And we're going to acknowledge that. And then, like, you know, again, opening up a conversation around, you know, these are some of the things that you might be experiencing as you step into this post-Olympic year. Even if you're not done, athletes go through that.
So you're saying they go through that even once the Olympics are over, even if they're training for the next quad? Yeah,
totally. Because I would be really surprised to meet an athlete that doesn't feel any bit of post-Olympic depression.
Right.
Even if they know they're going to keep going for the next quad, I feel with certainty there are very few and far between people that get out of that transition into the next phase.
I mean, it's just so extreme. The only thing I can compare it to is having been a collegiate rower and the moment we got back, I remember the moment we got back from IRAs and no one else was left on campus because it was June. And just going from that structure of, you know, lift, class, workout, study, eat with the same people, wake up, row, study, class, lift, eat with the same people.
Yeah.
And there's so much structure and there's so much, your team is literally around you at all times. And you really don't have to make a lot of decisions. It's just like, you know, what are you working on? Whether it's in the boat or your classwork or, and you have this, you know, very clear goals and structure and schedule. And then literally, like you sort of described, your whole identity as a student and as a college athlete, it feels like it was over in this instant. And I remember feeling a little bit rudderless, like, wait, who am I now? So I can't even imagine what that would be like for an Olympian. whose
Yeah.
life is so, an identity is so defined by a sport. So,
Yep.
my next question for you is around, going back to the Paralympians and Olympians. What advice do you have? And you touched on this in your article too, your piece, but do you have for them? Like, how do they set themselves up for a softer landing or transition on the other side of the Olympics?
I was just thinking about that as you were talking, because I don't actually think that transition is that dissimilar. And in my professional career, whether it was my first boss at IMG, who'd been in sports marketing for 30 years, I was there 6 months into my job there. He retired after 30-year career, and he went through a very similar kind of transition experience as I had. And so I was able to connect with him on like, hey, here are the things that I found helpful as I went through this that you might find helpful. And so some of those things, we're creatures of habit. I mean, humans are creatures of habit. Like, we thrive just like a 2-year-old does. It doesn't change. I'm thinking about my 3-year-old son. He likes boundaries. He likes structure. I think where we can create, I think the toughest part of that transition is your infrastructure completely falls away after the games. You're not at a training center anymore. The accountability of being with teammates, showing up for people other than yourself is stripped away. Your physical environment has literally changed. Even and I think the hardest part is the need to like the need beyond yourself to eat well, to exercise daily. Like, we all need something bigger than just ourselves to, I think, keep those structures in place and to commit to. And I find that definitely in life now, even. So the first thing I would tell athletes is to really identify how can they set up a structure for themselves post games, decide pretty early on, where do you want to be, and even if that's not a forever place, what are the things that you can keep from a structure point of view in place so that, maybe it's exercising every morning at 7 a.m. Maybe it's, frankly, this sounds silly, but like eating the same bowl of oatmeal and just like getting into the habit of like eating the same things in the morning, not like letting all those things, enjoy yourself, but like remember that structure is your friend, especially in a period of transition. And I would definitely say reaching out to people to have a conversation about it. I talk a lot about this in my job, but I think it's imperative that you have, I always say in career, like, you need a life coach as much as you need an executive coach, and to make sure you built the bench around you. Who is going to be your accountability partner for workouts? Who is going to be the person that you talk to from a mental health perspective? Get a therapist. Talk to a third party who's literally there to be in your corner as you go through this, and who you can share the craziest, thoughts and feelings that you're having as you go through this transition, rather than dealing with it yourself. And then, one of the things that I found, even from a career perspective, really helpful was to take the pressure off of like having to get that job right away, and instead shift the mindset around like, my job in these first 6 months post games is just to introduce myself into this world that I've really not been a part of. So, I made a list of people who, from a career perspective, really inspired me. And then I used the weight of being an Olympian to like just have an informational conversation with them with no strings attached. I wasn't looking for a job. I just wanted to know their story. And, it helped me having something to look forward to on the calendar, a conversation with, somebody who I really looked up to, or, just an informational coffee chat with, somebody who was at a company I was interested in. Those types of things. I think getting those things on the schedule is really helpful and makes you feel productive and like you're connecting.
It's really concrete advice. And I think my favorite part of that is well, of course, the oatmeal, but also the, really sort of granting yourself that time and not feeling like, well, within 1 month, I must be on a career track. Like, giving yourself, I think we're so programmed as, especially as athletes, like, how productive am I being? And so to sort of change the measurement, right? Change the rules of the game for a little bit of time and give yourself a bit of grace. to say, okay,
Absolutely.
I don't need to have the answer at this moment. I can explore, I can meet people. And you're right. Good advice too, to use the Olympian card.
Drop the O-bomb.
Yeah.
Use the O-bomb. It might not get you the job, but it'll get you the interview.
Yeah.
And I say that with fact, like it will get you the interview. So use it to meet people that you otherwise might not get a chance to meet and to have those conversations. I think that, there's something really important about taking the pressure off. And I think that is something, going back to your question about how can US Rowing help? How can you help? Again, that goes back to the conversation. These athletes are going to be the first people to put the most pressure on themselves in all aspects of their lives. And so I think, friends, family, taking the pressure off of them to know what's coming next is a huge piece of this. Because then it gives you room to just play. I think about, I always talk about, when I talk about this transition piece, I did not know I was going to become an Olympic rower when I first started playing sports. Instead, what did I do? My parents signed me up for a million different activities. And it wasn't until I was 14-year-olds that something stuck, and I think as adults, we lose that ability or that permission to give ourselves time to play and explore and to try things on again. And so I really encourage athletes to embrace this novice mindset again. They're starting over. There's no way to look at that differently. You are reinventing yourself, but you get to bring the best parts of what made you a successful athlete into this next phase of life. The most important thing is kind of approaching it with a novice mindset and being willing to try things on again and looking for opportunities that give you that ability to not know. You don't have to know what this next thing is. And I think that's taking the pressure off of having to know. I mean, I will tell you, Amanda, I was so starved for structure that I entertained things that I just categorically would not have been good
like the
at,
military,
like becoming a doctor. No, I was medical school. That seems like a great thing to sign up for because it's an 8-year program. There's a graduation at the end of it and an out. I mean, it was anything that put me on a track felt like. But and so I'm glad I didn't waste time pursuing that because I would not have made it. But just giving myself permission to take the pressure off was a huge thing that, going back and talking to my younger self, I'd love to have been able to have done for myself earlier.
That's such good advice. I feel like we might have to make this, not required listening for our athletes, but recommended listening, because I think you have such good advice for them. I wonder if you think, Lily and I were talking about this too, with the games this summer and some pretty high profile Olympians really coming out publicly about mental health struggles and challenges, and which, of course, everyone was sorry to see them enduring. But I for myself, I felt sort of glad that we're starting to come to this place where people can talk about that the way they could talk about a back injury or a leg injury, the same way they could talk about, mental health wise. I wasn't in the right place. And I wonder if you think there's been a shift since you were in college, just going back a couple decades. I don't know how many decades, not even.
Yeah.
Not even.
It's okay. Almost 2. It'll be 2 in
Almost
2024.
2. Okay. I didn't think it was quite 2 decades. Right. But do you think there's been a shift in the way we talk about mental health? Because I know when I was in college, that was not I don't even think that was that no one ever said anything about mental health. Not
really. No. And we've come so far. I mean, even I would say, I think the pandemic has been an accelerant for it in terms of the work culture that we're in. I mean, I will tell, since we're being transparent here, I mean, I don't think I've been through a transition as significant as this transition that I've just gone through from a career perspective, entering into a new job at the very start of a pandemic, moving into just being, like this online to start a new job, my entire structure falling apart around me and all of a sudden being stuck at home I found myself drawing on a lot of the transition skills that I learned when I went through my Olympic transition. More so than ever.
With a tiny human too.
With a tiny human at home and just, but I think I found myself, and I've actually given a few talks about this at Google, I found myself drawing on that Olympic skill set that I had to use back then in this new job to make sure that right. So keeping a structure, even though now I'm working from home and literally my commute is now gone. So that mental transition is now gone between work and home. I mean, there were so many things that I had to kind of artificially put back into place just to keep me sane. And then I think, but so all that to say, just answering your question, I do think the mental health conversation has changed. I am at Google. Google is very progressive, especially when it comes to employee relations and that type of thing. So we talk about mental health a lot at Google, but I think now more so than ever, the world has pivoted towards acknowledging what it is. Michael Phelps's documentary that came out during the games, I made it required watching for every Googler in marketing that I dealt with as we were preparing for the Olympics. It's called The Weight of Gold. It is phenomenal.
I'm gonna watch it tonight.
It's really powerful that a Michael Phelps, I encourage any family member or person that is, a part of USRowing that deals with these athletes, watch that, because it really summarizes what these athletes go through. You've got Michael Phelps, the best in the world, was depressed. We saw that with his DUI, and frankly, I was at Visa and we sponsored Michael Phelps, and I knew that what was happening as he was trying to make that transition. I was like, there's no way this behavior would be happening if he wasn't going through this transition right now.
Right. And I think coaches, we're all guilty of this, coaches, fans, of just, what did we get from that athlete in terms of watching them and admiring them? And of course they get the glory of winning medals, et cetera, and fame, and for some of them money. But in some ways, I think we don't appreciate them as full humans, and that enormous letdown and in that transition. So
absolutely.
I'm gonna put that on my list. The Weight of Gold. Thank you.
Weight of Gold. Yes, I think it's on HBO. It's fantastic.
Well, and I'm gonna make sure that people, our athletes have access to this and hear from you directly. And I know there's a lot we want to do for our athletes moving forward. Everything from mentoring to more mental health support to, let's talk about what's going to happen after the games.
Yep. And, I do think, listen, I lend myself to these athletes whenever I can. And I'm amazed that more don't reach out. I will say that. So I do think one of the things to help you, Amanda, as you help set the support up for the athletes, I do think alumni can share so much, because it is a very different conversation to sit with another athlete who's been through the transition, who's come out the backside of it, hopefully successfully. I mean, everybody's been successful. I can't name an athlete that hasn't had a successful transition, but sometimes it's just really helpful to hear it from someone who's been in it and who's come out the other side of it to say, you're going to get there, and to give them permission to identify these feelings that I've talked about. It's so good for me, it was really helpful I always wanted somebody else to give me permission to take the pressure off of myself. At the end of the day, you've got to do that for yourself, but it is helpful to hear of others who've gone through it. I think it's, so I'd love to see a program like that exist. And you can count on me to help you set it up.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I will. Thank you, Kate. And I think, your story makes me think also about how we are often reluctant to say when something is hard, right? When there are expectations for us to be happy or fulfilled. You won a silver medal in the Olympics. What? Right. You have no right to be anything but, happy and appreciative and on top of the world. And, it reminds me a little bit of becoming a parent for the first time, where everyone was saying, isn't this the happiest you've ever been? And it felt like it was the right answer was yes. Yes, of course. I've never been happier in my life, when in fact, no, this was, no one talked about what a really challenging transition that is, to go from thinking you're this strong, independent woman to, holy cow, I have this human in my life. And it changes who you are and the context of everything. So, I think the more we can talk about, everyone's journey is different, and not put these expectations on people to have certain feelings when they get to the other side of something. Yeah.
The only other thing I'll just add, and it's a really important one for me, is I think just to the point of you look at, there's a pyramid of athlete success, right? In terms of how culturally and commercially we look at these athletes, right? So you've got, these tier 1 athletes that make a lot of money, that are celebrities, through to the athletes that I trained with day in, day out, who were my teammates just as much as the ones I raced with at the Olympics, but who didn't make it. Those are the ones that I really want to make sure don't slip through the cracks, and who I think because I would not have made it to the Olympics if it were not for those teammates. Right. And yet those ones don't get a send off. They are cut, or they're not even thanked for their service in, helping make this team as strong as it was and as competitive as it was. I really think that those athletes deserve, that's why I want the conversation to start before you even go to the games. It's an ongoing dialogue, and the mental health condition of making a team, not making a team, all of that stuff, the transition's still coming for you no matter what. And it's not harder or easier based on if you made it to the games or not, but it's a shared experience. So I would say let's make sure we remember those athletes as well, because they're the ones that actually made the Olympians.
Right. Excellent point. Yeah. And pushing every day, right? Every day you're getting pushed by all of those athletes, whether they end up going to the games or not. They make everyone faster. So
100%.
That's a good point. All right, Kate, I've taken a lot of your evening. Well, it's afternoon there, but I have one last question for you, and it's the same question I ask everybody. And are you, this is not the question. Are you still rowing though?
I am not. I'm not still rowing. Until it gets easier in my life. Yeah.
You're doing something though. You're doing something physical. I saw you like 2 months ago and you looked like a fit human being.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Yeah, yes, I'm doing Peloton, and I'm actually actively kicking cancer's ass right now. So that's what I'm doing. I am going on the journey of my life right now in beating breast cancer. So, but I will tell you, Amanda, and I'm happy to share this with folks. Like, the key to my treatment success has been Wednesdays and Sundays. A group of Army of Love shows up on Peloton rides with me from all across my life, from teammates to colleagues to randoms that I'm friends with on Instagram. They show up on these Peloton rides with me, and that's gotten me through a lot of this. So
that's amazing. Yeah. Amazing.
Just going back to structure in transition, I think like building those things that provide accountability and community are so important.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. As if I didn't already think you were, this incredibly strong woman. Now you just took it to the next level there, Kate. Amazing. So Peloton. So the question that I always end with is, you've just finished a really hard row. So dial back to those days on the river. What is your really hard? You are exhausted and you're starving. So what is your go-to meal when you get off the water?
Okay, well, if I'm in Italy, it's Nutella. I mean, I can answer that question so fast. It is Nutella. I was just in the jar like for 3 years, and I used to sneak out these those little Nutella packets you'd get. I mean, I cannot believe that I'm saying this right now, because I literally just met with a nutritionist about the things we should not be eating if we want to combat cancer. Sugar's at the top of the list to cut from your diet. It would still be Nutella. I just think it's a very complete food source in terms of replenishing your energy and your happiness.
We will not share this with the nutritionist.
Right.
You're in safe space.
I would even tell her, I'm like, there's a component to joy too. And so Nutella is my secret dirty, not even a secret. I shout it from the mountaintops.
Yeah, it's clearly not a secret because, unless Ben edits that out. So you're not thinking a meal, you're just going to come off and eat a jar of Nutella?
Oh, and I think having a spoon at the ready is key in that. Yeah, just eat it out of the giant Costco-sized jar.
I appreciate that. That's one of my favorite answers so far. Okay, I learned a lot about people from this answer, actually. This question
I bet you do.
And their answers.
I mean, there's the answer that I could give, but there is the immediate trigger response was Nutella.
I want honest. That's what this is about. We're being honest. So, good. All right. Well, then I know next time I see you, which I hope is sooner rather than later, I know what to bring for you.
I'm in. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. And I'll be talking to you very soon again.
You bet, Amanda. This was awesome. Take good care.
Right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
And that's all for this episode of The Swing of Things. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Kate and Lily, and that you enjoyed our discussion on mental health. Remember to like, share, and follow from wherever you get your podcasts. It helps others to find us. Please subscribe to make sure you don't miss future episodes, and thank you for listening.